And welcome to Impactful Innovation with Commercis, the show that unpacks the sometimes remarkable ways that technology impacts our lives and the world around us. I'm David McClelland, and last time out we took a close look at how artificial intelligence is being exploited by both good and bad actors in the ever-escalating cyber battle. In today's show, we're plugging back into connectivity, but we're not looking for a socket somewhere on the wall behind the desk. No, instead, we're looking to the skies where, in the last handful of years, all but invisible constellations of small satellites have been busily assembling and are now promising faster and cheaper services to complement or compete with traditional ground-level fixed-line and cellular connections, and to offer new services to those so far underserved by traditional communications providers. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves until we've met our studio guest for today, Chief Business Development Officer at Commercis, Jack Buechler. Hello, Jack. How are you doing?
Thank you, David.
So, what's your skin in this game, for want of a better way of putting it? I know you've been working in the communication space, particularly the satellite communication space, for a little while.
Well, I suppose it's more than 30 years that I've worked in the satellite data space, specifically the Viasat area. So yeah, I've seen quite a few changes in that market.
Tell me about those changes, though, because certainly from my perspective, someone who hasn't worked specifically in this area very long at all, there seems to have been a real acceleration over the last 5 years or so, particularly as regards the low Earth orbit satellite constellations. But what's the big picture as you've seen it?
Well, we've seen systems go from very, very complex, large Earth stations, large antennas and highly trained technicians involved to much, much simpler, almost self-install by the end user, and price points as such as well. So I think it's fantastic. The market's opened up so much. It's just a great, great thing.
I really want to pull on some of those threads of your experience and maybe take a look at what that means for the future in this space as well in a few moments' time. But let's hear first from our down-the-line guests for today. And our zoom-out guest is Gidi Talmor from hiSky, a company that specialises in innovative satellite communications technologies and services. And I began by asking Gidi to give us the big-picture view of SATCOMs today and how it plugs in with ground-based communications.
Clearly, satellite communication has been there for many years. Everybody knows that for television and maybe some communication abilities, but most people will know communication over cellular and other terrestrial means. Satellite is now evolving very rapidly, and two reasons for that. Two different vectors are driving that. One is that the emergence of low Earth orbiting satellites. Everybody would know and heard about some of these examples, and more are coming in. So the satellites are physically getting closer to Earth, which increases the signal level that is possible to transmit and receive by the satellite. And the other vector is the ability of technology to produce smaller antennas, flat antennas, and tracking antennas, all at the same device. So unlike the television dishes that we all used to see in our houses, the new antennas are flat. They look like a small notebook. They generate an electronic beam which can be steered to different directions and therefore follow the low Earth orbiting satellites, and also generate a continuous communication on the move from moving platforms. So everybody, or most people, will probably be aware that now on many of the flights, there's internet connectivity.
Yes.
On commercial flights. And that hasn't been there until a few years back. And that internet connectivity is enabled by satellite communications, not even with low Earth orbiting, but with normal geo satellites. But the fact that there is a tracking antenna, a low profile, flat tracking antenna on the roof of that airplane enables the airplane to stay in communication with satellites along the journey and provide internet connectivity to the passengers in the plane. Initially only for transatlantic flights, but now I think the recent visit I had in the US, I've looked around, domestic aircraft, all of them had those dishes on top, and you can recognize this small hump, very small hump on the airplane.
And what sort of bandwidth are we able to get? I mean, let's look at the aviation use case there, the civil aviation use case. As somebody traveling between Europe and the US, for example, am I expecting something that I might get at home now or in the office? Is it still limited to what we might get with 3G, 4G wireless? What is the cutting edge right now of these kind of wireless airborne networks?
There's a continuous race on that. And of course, the more you pay, the more access you get. I guess the airplane as a whole gets anywhere between 100 megabits per second to 1 gigabit per second, the whole aircraft. Now that has to be divided amongst, a few tens to a couple of or 300 passengers. Not all of them are signed in. So the more you pay, the more access of this chunk you get. We get very spoiled at home that we get very high bandwidth, online gaming, very low delay. I don't think we're there yet in the aircraft's environment, but we're getting close to it.
And bringing the conversation back down to earth, you mentioned these compact, flat receivers, transmitters, devices that enable the satellite connectivity there. In what kind of settings are we seeing those? Are we finding them on the side of buildings or the roofs of buildings, or are we finding them, you mentioned maritime there, how about in vehicles? Are we finding them increasingly in commercial and passenger vehicles as well?
So the antennas are becoming smaller. The technology enables the antennas to become small. Now there is still a physical connection, so the smaller the antenna, the less bandwidth it can do, because there's the element of physics that we just can't get rid of. We can make antennas now the size of a cellular phone. So literally the size, like a small size. And in parallel, there's a third vector happening like this. We talked about the satellites getting lower, the antennas becoming smaller. These two things enable the small antennas to communicate at higher bit rates with the lower satellites. Because now the satellites are lower, so although the antenna is smaller, physics dictates bandwidth will be lower, but we brought the satellite closer to it, so it compensates back and you can get a bit more bit rate out of that small antenna. And the third vector that is happening is the use or the need of vehicles to be connected at all times. Now that's very important because we all know that we have as individuals, we have our cellular phones wherever we go. Fine. Vehicles starting to use that, and there's now regulation within Europe, and I think that's coming in the US as well. Every vehicle comes out of manufacturing line with a SIM card inside, either physical or digital or electronic SIM, but the vehicle is connected. The vehicle is connected for various reasons over the cellular network. Question is, what happens outside the cellular network? If the vehicle roams out of that cellular bubble, and those bubbles will remain bubbles, the cellular operators are not even claiming that they will cover the whole planet. They're saying we will cover population masses, but the vehicles roam over roads which connect population masses and they go out of those. So what happens to the vehicle that once and used to be connected when it roams out of that cellular bubble? So here comes the ability to connect it via satellite with the antennas that are small, put on platforms, land platforms like vehicles, and may be able to do higher bit rates using low Earth orbiting satellites. All these three things come together. The low Earth orbiting satellites, the small antennas, and the need of the vehicles to be connected. So this drives a new need in the market, and indeed a very important and bubbling market. There are some associations that have started to pursue that for time. I can mention, for one, the 5GAA, the 5G Automotive Association. And one of their drives is to get the technology ready with the requirements of the vehicle industry to be placed on on top of vehicles. Even in that, there are two stages of implementation. The whole idea of having the vehicle connected outside of cellular is called non-terrestrial network. It's NTN, non-terrestrial connectivity. And there's two ways to deliver communication from satellites. The traditional way, which has evolved along the lines that I've described so far, starting with television, moving to big dishes that are mechanically tracking, then moving to flat dishes that are electronically tracking and put on airplanes. And now the technology enables to put them on vehicles, being small antennas and giving proper bit rates like, megabits per second to tens of megabits per second to the vehicle. So that's one direction, using those traditional frequencies. The other direction is taking those cellular base stations that we used to have them along the ground with big antennas and putting those on satellites. And now you reverse the concept of you roaming around the cellular base station. Now the cellular base station is rolling around you because it is flying in space and it's broadcasting those same cellular frequencies that you used to receive on your normal phone. It's broadcasting them from space. It's a very interesting idea. The direction is there. There are some companies that are trying to do that. That is, however, using the traditional cellular frequencies, not the satellite frequencies.
Right.
If that uses the cellular frequencies, that means that you would use your normal handset as it is to communicate via the satellite, or it's a different satellite because it uses a different frequency, it flies differently, but it is a satellite. Your handset will communicate with those. Then comes new limitations, physical limitations. How many subscribers can communicate simultaneously? What's the bit rate each one of them will get? A lot of technical considerations there. But the concept is there. So initially you start seeing operators providing emergency messages from normal phones over satellite. This is what they do. They use the normal antenna that is on your cellular phone using the normal frequencies, but it is broadcasting to a base station practically, which is up in space.
So this is why I'm able to make emergency calls on my smartphone without it having a satellite dish or a flat object, without the entirety of it being a satellite dish, because it's using the existing antenna and essentially using existing cellular frequencies.
Exactly. And cellular protocols as well. There is a big thrust in the 5G, or it's called the 3GPP, the association that governs 5G technology moving to 6G. It's a big effort there to get those protocols approved so that the phones will be able to do, and there's a lot of considerations happening. Yes, this is how you do it. And today they promise a voice call or a message, and they say that you will be able to have data connectivity later on.
Yeah.
But you will not, because this frequency range is limited and is relatively narrow, there is a limit to how many users will be able to get how much bit rate over that limited capacity. It means that if you want to enable high bit rate for the vehicle, and the vehicles are becoming, once you release the genie out of the bottle, there's more and more bandwidth that is being required all the time. So in the non-terrestrial network approach adopted by the vehicle manufacturers and represented by the association that I mentioned before, for example, the 5G, that has by itself two stages of implementation. Stage one is using those normal antennas with normal frequencies to these new satellites, which is called NB, narrowband NTN. Narrowband NTN is using, the vehicle, by the way, also has an antenna. Even slightly better antenna than the one you have on your cell phone. Because if you remember those shark fins on the back of vehicles,
yes,
the vehicle manufacturers hate them, but they're there because the designers say, no, it's ugly. I personally don't think it is, but it's there. So those shark fins have antennas in them. And those are slightly better antennas than the one you have on your phone. So the vehicle already has this antenna. And the first stage of non-terrestrial network is narrowband, which will use that antenna, use the normal frequencies, and enable basic messaging, telemetry, maybe low bitrate voice calls over the normal medium that was there until today. It's still there. The next stage, one beyond that, which is projected to 2030-ish, 2029, 2031, that's the range. The next stage is called NR-NTN, New Radio, Non-terrestrial network. And that new radio requires those antennas that I mentioned before. It moves to the higher frequencies that are the traditional satellite frequencies, and it brings the vehicle to the level of an aircraft.
Right.
So before, the aircraft had a big antenna. Look, these big antennas that you put on the aircraft today, they would cost, I don't want to bust anybody's balls, but they would cost between $100,000 to $300,000. It's an expensive device.
Yeah, the equivalent of an expensive passenger vehicle.
On itself.
Yes.
We're aiming with the technology that we're having in hiSky, and we're deploying already via small terminals. We're aiming to put small antennas on vehicles, on passenger vehicles, at the cost of around $100.
Okay.
Now then, that gets the attention of the vehicle manufacturers and then fits in line with what they're looking for. Because, every cent counts on a passenger vehicle. And on one hand, they're saying, look, no connection is not an option. We need to be connected at all times. Our devices roam outside of cellular bubbles. Yes, thank you very much. We can start with narrowband non-terrestrial networks to do telemetry, but because traffic is expected to grow exponentially all the time, we already need to plan ahead for the higher bit rates. We need to get our 1, 10, 100 megabits per second into the vehicle itself. We must, therefore, there's no physical ability to do that. There's no space to put it in the traditional cellular frequencies.
Yep.
We may have multiple vehicles in the same geographical spot, all consuming this bit rate. I need to move to KU or KA, and therefore I need those new antennas, but I can't pay $100,000. That's the cost of the vehicle. I need to pay something very low. And this is where hiSky as a company has been selling such small antennas for mobile platforms for many years. And we have terminals in the market today, which are complete terminals with the mechanics and the random and the connectors and everything that you put with magnets on the top, like it's called an aftermarket. You put it on a ship, on a truck, on a tractor, on a small vehicle. And these will sell in the market today at about $1,000, $1,500, the whole thing. So when you think of it, it's already 2 orders of magnitude below what is being put on aircraft. And we now need to take it 1 more order of magnitude down in cost to enable to put it on vehicles. And that's within reach. And that's the beauty of this now. So this third vector of getting the antennas smaller is fitting very well with the 2 other vectors that are happening in the market. One, satellites are becoming lower, enabling higher bit rates, and the need of this new market, the vehicle market, who says, hey, I'm going to need connectivity. I have something to do in the meanwhile with narrowband. Thank you. That's good. But within 3 to 5 years, I need to have something new. And by the way, you know what? This is how long it takes me to implement a new device into a vehicle.
Question there, though, Gidi. In vehicles, obviously access to my online music streaming services, wherever I happen to be, that's one thing. But when we start looking at satellite connectivity in vehicles, whether it's narrowband, whether it's new radio going forward, what does this enable? Does it bring us any closer to maturity of self-driving capabilities or vehicle-to-vehicle, vehicle-to-infrastructure comms, stuff that's been spoken about for a long time of needing a platform of connectivity, but at least in a widespread degree hasn't really matured yet?
It takes a long time for the vehicle market to adopt a new use, but there are some extremely exciting things that are happening, even along the way before we get to autonomous driving. Autonomous driving definitely needs high bitrate connectivity to the vehicle at all times. Like there are the cases that all the autonomous vehicles are talking about, that at some point the ADAS, the computer inside the vehicle, gives up, says, I don't know what to do, stops the vehicle and literally starts crying and says, I don't know what to do. Somebody needs to intervene. And you have terrified passengers inside. Somebody needs to take control from the outside. And it must be a high bitrate link to get the vehicle out of where it is. But that's a really extreme case. The vehicle, what you rightfully mentioned, the V2X, vehicle to anything approach, is very interesting because they can do today things that looks like science fiction. Like you could see, I've heard one vehicle manufacturer says, you could see the cyclist over the hill. So you're going up the hill, and there was another vehicle going on the other side of that hill coming towards you, and he detected a bicycle on his way up. He informs the network that there is a bicycle at that position. The network then informs you. You on your nav screen see that bicycle ahead of you before you physically could see it. And that's absolutely natural. You could get roadworks alerts, accident alerts, any kind of obstacle alert happening at junctions, around hills. Now, of course, this is very important when you have autonomous driving, because you want the vehicle to be aware of as many things as around it to take them into account. But it's also very helpful to us human drivers that we can have knowledge. And with AI, the vehicle starts analyzing what's important, what's less important, gives to your attention things. All this relies on communication.
We think of vehicles as computers on wheels these days, and when we talk about decision-making being made at the edge, vehicles are the ultimate edge computing device in many regards. So the more power that they have, yes, they need the right information at the right time as well, but ultimately they're going to be the ones really making the split second, the microsecond decisions there from a safety point of view. Gidi, Talmor, thank you so much for chatting us through non-terrestrial networks and this vision of the, well, really not too distant future. In fact, as you've described in many senses, it's already there, of connectivity directly from our various devices and our vehicles all the way up to these low Earth orbit satellites. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Pleasure.
And thanks again to Gidi from hiSky for helping us to cover a lot of ground in that chat. Our Zoom In conversation today focuses on one important element of non-terrestrial networks, D2D or direct-to-device. And for that, I connected with Kevin Cohen, VP for Direct-to-Device and Strategic Initiatives at Viasat. But for reasons that'll become clear, before we tackle today's D2D picture, I began by asking him about one of his previous roles.
Viasat, starting in about 2016, started looking at how we could deliver broadband to emerging markets as we were launching a satellite constellation. It was covering the globe with both Viasat 2 and Viasat 3, which are K-band broadband satellites that offer really high speeds, really good economics, so low cost per gigabyte, which allows people to stream and use the internet just like we use it with cable and fiber broadband connections. So we launched in Mexico, essentially putting Wi-Fi hotspots up on, mom and pop shops, the roofs of mom and pop shops all throughout the country, in areas that were unserved by cellular service and unserved by other, broadband providers or Wi-Fi providers. And we'd sell service on a per hour, per day, per month basis, where you'd essentially have to walk up to the hotspot and use the service around the store. So we were, I think it was 2019, we were named Fast Company, changing the world, and a few of those different conversations of really innovative ideas of how you can serve the emerging markets. And we took what we did in Mexico, we brought it to Guatemala, we brought it on a demonstration case in Nigeria, and then we took it to Brazil. And that evolved over time to actually offering cellular service in Mexico. So we partnered with a cellular company or a wholesale network operator in Mexico called Altan, and we got access to their cellular spectrum. And in areas where there's no cell service, we put up our own towers. So we operate the towers. People now have cell service for the first time in those areas. And then we offer our own broadband to the customers, like basically a SIM card and a Wi-Fi access box, that you can think of that you get from when you get your 5G home internet or 4G home internet, same idea. And then Viasat SIM cards that go into your smartphone or into even a MiFi, because that MiFi allows you to share the service with multiple devices. So we deployed that, and it was really awesome because, seeing the things that people can do with broadband when they have it ubiquitously throughout the community, it really changes lives. So going from a Wi-Fi access point where you had no broadband to have some broadband to now having, internet everywhere, and being fully connected with, a cellular experience.
I want to come back to that in a moment and talk a bit more about the impact that connectivity can have, particularly to communities, to societies where they haven't had that connectivity before. But just coming back to the role that you have now, you lead the development of the global direct-to-device segment for Viasat. What are the initiatives that you've seen over the last handful of years or so that are now helping to build that platform for what comes next with non-terrestrial networks?
Yeah. So it's technology, sometimes it's a slow march and sometimes it's really fast, right? And in this case, it was a slow march. So there's these standards bodies in 3GPP, which determine what cellular frequencies or what frequencies should be added to the standard that go into chipsets, which then go into cellular devices. And as part of release 17, which, there were 17 releases to get to there, it was determined that the spectrum that is in the mobile satellite services spectrum band, which is called L band and S band. So it sits kind of near GPS frequencies and near some other cellular frequencies. So that was added to the standard a few years ago. So that was step one in the puzzle. Without that, you have a lot of operators and MSS operators that have satellite constellations today, whether they're GEO or LEO. So if you think of Globalstar, if you think of Iridium or Viasat or Space 42 now, they all offered MSS services, closed platforms. So you could buy a phone, a GSPS phone from Inmarsat, now Viasat, that could allow you to make voice calls. But you'd had to have that piece of equipment, which was very expensive, and you'd have to have a service plan with that provider. So now moving to this point where it's open standard. So now you have 3GPP allowing it to be open standard. So now the chipset providers, the Qualcomms, the MediaTeks, Samsungs of the world now have chipsets both for handsets, for IoT devices, and then for automotive, which can be embedded into devices which can be used to access terrestrial, cellular networks and satellite. So now you've got, once you had the chipsets, they had to go into the phones and devices. So now those phones are out there. Most notably, the Pixel 9 has that feature selling globally. And then in the US, the Galaxy Samsung S25 and a few new Samsung devices also have the feature. And we're seeing more and more devices come out with that.
So that standardization of the protocols and then of the hardware as well has brought the cost down dramatically to the point where in consumer handsets, smartphones that are obviously so many people have smartphones, it's made it far more accessible. What has this connectivity therefore enabled? How will it change what we do every day? maybe for me, I live in a city. It's relatively infrequently that I don't have cellular connectivity with my mobile unless I'm out at sea or I'm on holiday going on a hike or something. But overall, what is the hope that this connectivity will enable for consumers?
Yeah, I mean, you see today, where can it help with consumers? So the first things that have been launched are an SOS feature with the Pixel 9, which is similar to the Apple feature that they launched, and Apple's partnering with Globalstar. So that's, not necessarily a daily feature, hopefully not, but it gives you some assurance that if you're outside of cellular connectivity or if there's a disaster, you can call for help. So you can be in a city and we saw Pixel SOSs sent during the last hurricane in, I believe it was in Florida or North Carolina. So, that's something that is not a daily thing, but it's definitely important. And then you have the next feature that was launched was SMS. So now you're seeing SMSs being sent in areas where you're outside of coverage. And so you can say, hey, I'm not lost. Hey, I need help. Hey, I'll be there in 2 hours. So typically that's when you're outside of cellular service. And you're seeing also T-Mobile launch T-Satellite, which offers that service, through Starlink. So then the next, what's coming next is that let's say you're out fishing and you're coming in, you're trying to know which port you should go to bring your fish, salmon, let's just say. And what one has a higher price than the other. Well, you can ensure that you're going to the place where you can, get the most for your money. And then I think the other one that even people living in urban areas are going to see someday, I think this will probably in the 2030s, more of a seamless roaming so that, you hit those dead spots of coverage when you're driving and your call drops or your Zoom drops. So having seamless connectivity is the next frontier where essentially, as long as you have some sort of clear view of the sky, you will, never drop a call or never drop your, streaming video.
And that brings me on to the question of coexistence or how complementary what we're talking about here in terms of satellite communications to consumer devices and even consumer vehicles, as you mentioned there, how they coexist with cellular, which already has a very, very well matured infrastructure. How do you see them working together going forward?
Yeah, it's really symbiotic because essentially you now will have all the devices embedded with the capability to speak to satellites. They can choose whether they want to or not. They being the cellular operator can choose whether they want to enable that feature, or the user can decide if they want to pay for that feature. But there's use cases where, for example, IoT devices for water metering or gas metering, where in an agricultural setting, they're going to buy an IoT device. It will have the capability to speak to satellite and terrestrial, and they can choose if they want to pay for the package that talks to both or just talks to cellular. And then they can upgrade at a later date when they see the value of satellite connectivity. So essentially you just have this latent capability, which is going to be, enabled, which will enable seamless connectivity and ensure that, an always on, a feature is available. And I think that's going to, people will see the value of that over time as they have it available.
Ubiquitous connectivity for consumers with their smartphones and with their cars, of course, is one thing. And it's very exciting, a really exciting area to be working in right now. But I wonder if going back to emerging markets and less well-served regions where you've worked very closely in the past, what are the ways in which you've seen innovations in communications, in non-terrestrial networks in particular, really making a big impact?
Yeah, I've driven in these areas, going on dirt roads in the middle of nowhere and, where you haven't been under cellular connectivity for hours. And just the safety feature of being able to make a call, is going to be game changing for these places. You need to be able to let someone know you're safe. You need to be able to call for help. Your car broke down. I mean, all these things where you're always worried when you're driving along these areas that something could happen and you have to wait for someone to come by. And that may or may not happen in a given time. So also, as you get to these, rural areas, the infrastructure where you may have cellular connectivity or you may have, some sort of broadband, there's a lot of broadband at low price points using, 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi signals, which they're shooting, over these kind of, you wouldn't call them towers, but poles, if you will. They go from, kilometers and kilometers, and that infrastructure goes out very often. Power goes out. There's a large windstorm, and they lose their broadband connectivity. And so having a capability of, satellite direct to handset allows them to use broadband. I wouldn't say that broadband to the phone is ever going to get to the point where it's competing with your cell service on a price per gigabyte or your capability of streaming video. But it is a supplement when you lose connectivity. And so in those cases where they lose connectivity, they'll still be able to make those calls, still be able to make video calls, still be able to, browse the internet for, certain high value things. So I'd say all of that really says that there are things in emerging markets that with, adding this feature is going to change the game for them and increase their happiness and their livelihood.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of smart infrastructure, pipelines and so on, disaster relief you mentioned as well, and thinking about applications such as agriculture as well. If I can't get mobile reception in a field as a consumer, whatever. But if you are responsible for a large estate with lots of, whether it's crops or whether it's animals, and all of a sudden there is a weather incident or there is a breach of my security perimeter or whatever it is, that can be someone's livelihood. And again, those are the situations where having some sort of signaling, some sort of connectivity to be able to see and to be able to mitigate the impact of that can really, really make or break someone's livelihood in these regions, can't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of these, as you call them, estates, a lot of these agricultural regions, these fields can go for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers, and the displacement to go from where there is connectivity to no connectivity can be very long. And it's, from a productivity standpoint, wasteful to have to go back and forth to go back into connectivity. And there's also times where you need to know whether something is working or not working. And if you have to go check on it physically and it's been not working for days, that can really impact, crop productivity and the livelihood of these farmers, which, some of them may be living precariously, and need every single bit out of their crops as possible. And then just thinking about if you're out in the field and something happens, not being able to call for help, is a big problem.
Kevin, it's a really exciting area to be working in right now. There's so much buzz around non-terrestrial networks and the opportunities that it enables. And that's quite aside from the fact that, many technologists find the technology really exciting too. But it's that impact on all of us from a safety point of view, from a productivity point of view, and particularly how it can enable people in remote regions that just haven't had a great quality connectivity before to be connected. It's a really fantastic time to be working in this area. Kevin Cohen, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, David.
Thanks again, Kevin. Jack, what did you take away from those conversations with Gidi and Kevin? Any big picture reflections?
Yeah, I'm seeing greater accessibility of these networks, simpler to deploy. You don't have to be a master's degree engineer to do these installations anymore with complex tools or anything like that. It's going to be easier, and easier means simpler, and simpler means greater and wider usage of these networks. And of course, that means lower cost. And lower cost means greater numbers of users that are going to get the benefit of these networks.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of simplicity, I can get a terminal from, let's say, Starlink, or my mobile phone already has direct-to-device communications directly up to a satellite. It is as easy as plug and play, or just not having to do anything, just a little swipe on the screen in order to get connectivity now, which is great in so many regards. But that doesn't mean that there isn't complexity there somewhere else, though, right?
No, I mean, there's massive complexity in the network, but let's leave that to the experts, and that's fine. Look at GSM networks and how many cell towers, just the building of the cell towers or the terrestrial networks that connect them. And these networks never work on their own. Satellite networks always work with ground-based networks. The two go together somewhere on the ground, somewhere in the network.
And in terms of that tethering, if you like, of course, the satellites themselves aren't tethered to the ground, although I seem to remember seeing some weird and wonderful inventions back in the day where there was some kind of physical tethering to equipment up in the sky. But instead we had, what were called teleports, but they've evolved into something that has far more uses, far more capability now. Tell me about that.
Yeah, teleports is really an old-fashioned idea, I think. We are moving into a different era. Customers want to get their data onto the satellite, they want to get them off the satellite, and where they go from there, they store them, they may store their data locally, they may pass it through a fiber network to another location or to the internet itself, and then who knows where, globally. They may return it back onto another LEO system. So, there's quite a few different options there, but it's not just onto the satellite anymore. It's going to be much more flexible than that.
So it's co-locating a number of different capabilities, whether that's compute, maybe energy as well as storage, on what used to be the teleport. It's bringing everything together to create a kind of multi-use, multi-function capability. Just happens to be at the point at which there is an uplink to a satellite constellation.
Even as silly as offices, because you need to get access to your equipment, you need to have training centres, you need to join the dots all together, basically.
Now, something that we've spoken about at length in this series of Impactful Innovation has been security, ensuring the security, the sanctity of the information that is either stored at rest or is in flight from its target to its, from its source to its target. When we're looking at physical cabling and fixed line infrastructure, that's one thing. But how does that security picture change when we're looking at satellite, when we're looking at non-terrestrial networks here?
Well, once we put the data into the air, so to speak, into the ether, it's there for others to access, and that's always a danger. Fibre networks, maybe they're buried in the ground, maybe they're running under the sea. It's a little bit harder to get access to them. They may be more secure, maybe locked up. The access points may be locked up. But once it's in the air, anybody can fish it out. And once you have that access, you've really got to apply a lot of security onto that to stop people being able to access it.
But surely the majority of communications these days is encrypted, whether it's through a VPN or just through a kind of inherent protocol there. So while you can see some ones and zeros, let's say, what do you really know about it?
You can still get certain information just by counting the ones and zeros, if nothing else.
Okay.
And that gives you an information path about where the traffic's flowing. Maybe you can't read it, but maybe you can get some other statistical information out of it.
And as we start to look towards the future, I'd love to know where you see non-terrestrial networks taking us next.
I think I'd like to see, and this is further down the road, the interoperability of terminals. This is going to be a major, major benefit to the network and satellite operators running these LEO networks. They're not there yet. Each one has their own network with their own dedicated hardware. But at a future point, let's hope, a bit like your mobile phone. You buy your mobile phone in the US, it works in the UK. You buy your phone in another country and you can bring it to the UK. that interoperability has caused the GSM system to be so widely and globally used.
And that's something we take for granted now, but going back even a relatively short period of time ago, you couldn't do that. If you wanted to go across to the US, your options were severely limited.
Exactly. You had a different phone, it didn't work, and it only worked on certain networks. And then you had tariff issues and how much were they going to cross-charge you. Today we see certain tariffs working across the EU. There's all sorts of things like that can be, I think, enhanced. It actually enhances the offering to the customer at the end of the day, and that means that even more users are going to come on, not less. It's not a fight. It's a joining together.
So in a word, then, this journey that we've been on for the time in which you've been in the industry, particularly over the last 5 years, and then looking forward, if I were to summarize what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like accessibility would be that word. Have you got any other offers on accessibility in terms of a summary word?
Accessibility and cost. Those two things are definitely cost on a downward trend, accessibility on an upward trend.
Yeah. Jack, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
For our next episode 8 of 10 already, wow, we're staying with the profound impact that connectivity and innovation can have in places which have proven traditionally difficult to connect. We'll be speaking with the director of the Telecommunications Development Bureau at the ITU and hearing a zoom-in case study on how automation technology at a newly built seaport is enabling a community in Eastern Africa. That's coming up next in Impactful Innovation with Commercis. Until then, from everybody here, bye-bye.